introduce our second speaker, Dr. Sheena Iyengar. Dr. Sheena Iyengar is a world expert on choice and decision-making, and we're very lucky to have her here at this event today. Her book, The Art of Choosing, received a Financial Times and Goldman Sachs Business Book of the Year 2010 award and was ranked #3 on the Amazon Best Business and Investing Books of 2010. Her TED Talks have collectively received almost 4 million views, and her research continues to inform markets, businesses, and individuals around the world. Dr. Iyengar is the inaugural S.T. Lee Professor of Business at Columbia University. Growing up in New York City as a blind Indian American and a daughter of immigrants, she began to look at the choices she and others had and how to get the most from choice. She first started researching choice as an undergrad at the University of Pennsylvania, where she graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Economics. She received her PhD in social psychology from Stanford University. In 2011 and 2019, she was named a member of the Thinkers 50, a global ranking of the top 50 management thinkers. She won the Dean's Award for Outstanding Core Teaching from Columbia Business School in 2012. In a groundbreaking new course called Think Bigger, Dr. Iyengar created a 6-step method for teaching people how to take advantage of lessons learned from neurological and cognitive science to put our minds to work when generating our best ideas. Her new book is entitled Think Bigger, and it will be released soon. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Iyengar to the virtual stage for her talk, How to Think Bigger.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was such a warm introduction, and I loved your talk, Michael, and we have a lot to talk about. One thing I will say is, building on what Michael said, one of the tips that I often give people when making choices is I say you have to be choosy about choosing, which is exactly what Michael was talking about. So let's start by me showing you a picture of a famous sculpture. Do you know who she is? Of course, that is a rhetorical question. Now I want to tell you a little more about how we think about her. So I'm going to turn on a video.
Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that Twin Cities frame. Keep, ancient lands, your storied pomp, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my light beside the golden door. Emma Lazarus.
The Statue of Liberty is not just a statue. The Statue of Liberty is not just a piece of art. The Statue of Liberty is not just a tourist attraction to which close to 4 million people come and visit. The Statue of Liberty is not just the symbol that greets us as we're on a plane flying over New York or into New York. She's not just the statue that so many immigrants encountered as they landed in the United States. She is, by the very nature of that story that is told in that poem, a symbol that has come to mean so much. She's come to mean such abstract concepts like freedom, democracy, hope, opportunity, the power of imagination and dreaming. She is something that means something that's at once common to all of us that see her and yet feels very personal to each of us. It's how I would describe a big idea. That Lady Liberty is a big idea. She's more than simply the content or substance that makes her physical being. The question I want to ask tonight is, how do you get a big idea? Where do they come from? How did Frederick Bartholdi come up with the idea of making Lady Liberty? You could tell the story by describing Frederick Bartholdi as a hero on a hero's journey. He was an idealist. He had a dream. He had this dream when he was really young, around 21 years of age, when he went to Egypt. He wanted to make a colossal statue, much like those colossal monuments that guarded the ancient Egyptian tombs. In fact, he tried to make one of those. He put in an application to make a beautiful statue that would sit there in the Suez Canal. He was turned down, though, and instead they decided to build a very simple lighthouse. He was crushed. But then later, when there was an opportunity to build a statue commemorating the 100 years of freedom in the United States, the idealism kicked in and he fought hard and he managed to collect lots of money from the French to build the statue. And then again, he had to be determined and collect lots of money here in New York and Philadelphia to finally build the pedestal upon which the Lady Liberty stands. So that's one story. Of course, I could also tell you that he was a pragmatist and happened to be at the right place and at the right time. After all, his best friend, a man by the name of Edouard de la Boulaye, was a real activist at the time. He was anti-Napoleon and his descendants, and he wanted to restore faith in the French for French democracy and freedom. After all, as you know, the French were going through their own tumultuous period at that time. And so he saw an opportunity when America was about to have its 100-year celebration of freedom and democracy. And he just happened to be good friends with this artist, this sculptor called Frederick Bartholdi, and said, hey, why don't you make this statue? He was the right man for the right moment. So notice how I could tell his story from the perspective of an idealist, or I could tell his story from the perspective of the pragmatist. As an idealist, we think of him as a man with a dream, with a vision, who persisted against all the odds. As a pragmatist, we would say he adapted to the opportunities that confronted him, and he was flexible and open-minded. And of course, both of these stories are at least partially true, but they don't really tell us, how did he get the idea? He needed both of these mindsets, but how did he get the idea? Where did the actual idea come from? Well, let's take Lady Liberty apart and divide her up into her various pieces. Well, we know that her colossal image comes from his inspiration that he got from looking at those Egyptian monuments guarding the ancient Egyptian tombs. But what about the rest? Well, in the 1860s, a very famous painter in France at that time was a man by the name of Lefebvre, who just happened to have a very famous painting called La Vérité, the Lady of Truth. Notice the pose. Well, there was also the seal of France at the time, and there was also this interesting picture that was on the 5-franc note at that time in France. Notice the crown, Libertas, from the Roman period. And what about the face of the Statue of Liberty? You know, Bartholdi had a very close relationship with his mother, who became a widow when he was 2. You put all these pieces together, her face, the pose from La Vérité, Libertas, and don't forget Egypt. and you create a combination. Everything was familiar, and yet, even though I have torn apart Lady Liberty, I suspect you're still mesmerized by the whole. She's a creative combination. Just as Schumpeter told us in the 1900s, what is innovation? And I'll simplify now, but a new combination of old ideas. It's creative combination, and that's well recognized. When we say, what is innovation? We answer, it's creative combination. And of course, the Gestalt psychologist built on that and said, no, an aha moment is more than just the sum of the pieces that come together. The whole is much greater. But where do we get these creative combinations? You know, psychologists and more recently neuroscientists have puzzled over this. Freud told us that these ideas come to us in our unconscious, perhaps in our dreams, in our sleep. And then more recent neuroscientists talk about the benefits of mind wandering, because after all, we can solve so many of our problems when we're maybe on a jog or taking a nap or doing some other mindless activity. All of these ways of thinking about where creative combination comes from assume that it's out of our control, that it's all magic, that somehow spontaneously the brain does its magical work and we just get these combinations. And certainly these periods of mindless wandering are helpful, and I don't want to discourage you from doing that important jog or taking a nap. Certainly you need your mind to be at rest. But I want to suggest to you that we can do so much better when teaching people how to solve complex problems. That creative combination is not something that you have to think of as being uncontrollable or out of your reach. That if anything, modern day neuroscience, the study of learning and memory and the study of cognitive biases teaches us how to be more prescriptive about solving problems. That in fact, we can apply the knowledge that we have gained from the last 30 odd years and create a more prescriptive model for how to teach people how to do creative combination. So let's think about what we've learned from learning and memory and neuroscientists like Eric Kandel and others. The way you can think of learning and memory is our minds are like a library system. We're constantly collecting information nodes and putting them onto different shelves in our memory bank. Sure, we're not democratic in the way we store and retrieve information. We're bias-making machines, for sure. But every time I ask you a question, like what's 2 + 2, or come up with a word that doesn't exist right now that rhymes with airplane, you go into your memory bank and you pull out different information bits and you connect them and you form a thought. And that's how we do all kinds of activities, whether we're doing analytical activities or creative activities, we're using the same process. Well, certainly, if you look at all the great innovators throughout time, artists, inventors, scientists, philosophers, no matter whom you pull up, entrepreneurs, they do this process of taking different pieces that they have in their mind, connecting them in a new way. They engage in what some have called combinatory play, and they come up with a grand idea. And of course, you can't have a grand idea if you don't have the pieces in your brain at the time. But this process that we've always assumed to be subconscious, I believe we can make more deliberative, more conscious. And in the process, perhaps make it even less biased. So I want to describe to you a tool that I have been creating for the past several years and have been teaching to MBA students. And I've now taught it to thousands of students, and I want to briefly share it with you. I call it the choice map. And I call the method of coming up with new ideas choice mapping. And of course, you would expect nothing less than the word choice from somebody who spent her entire career studying choice. So I'm going to walk you through what a choice map is and what is choice mapping in the very brief amount of time I have left. So here's what it is. Think of it as a 5x5. Sure, you can make it smaller or bigger, but not too much bigger because we do have cognitive limitations in information and choice processing. Here's what's at the top. What's the problem you're trying to solve? And just like Michael said, you have to spend a lot of time thinking about how to frame that problem. Because as Einstein said, if I had an hour to save the planet, I would spend the first 55 minutes defining and understanding the problem. You then take that problem and you break it down into the most important subparts of the problem, which go along the left column. And now in each row, you fill up each row with examples of how that problem has been solved in history by others in the present and in the past. But when I say solved, I don't just mean solved in your domain of expertise. Your domain of expertise is only in the first column. Every other column that makes up this choice map should be drawing from the way people from other domains, other disciplines have solved this problem. That's how you get real interdisciplinary thought. And so you create a choice map where it's filled with at least 5 different examples of how to solve the problem, 5 different tactics for each subpart. And notice how I'm very deliberately creating a blueprint for your mind to use as it's consciously combining. And so now you take each tactic per row and combine it with other tactics, 1 per row, line them up in your head and ask yourself, what could I imagine creating? Now, of course, creative combination is not merely slapping them together and creating some Frankenstein. It is a little more elegant than that. And so it does require imagination as you combine these pieces, and that's where mind wandering can come in quite handy. And so that is choice mapping. Now, I've described it in brief, but it actually takes it's a skill like any other that has to be developed, and to do it well is an art. It's like going to the gym. Now, what I'm going to say in conclusion about the choice map and choice mapping is notice a few things here. It accounts for cognitive limitations. It made it 5x5, and I'm being very deliberate about how big we're going to make it. I'm also being very deliberate about what pieces go into it so that you are more diverse in what information bits you collect. Because I think being diverse in the information you collect is key to what people often refer to as out-of-the-box thinking. I'm going to end with a quote by the great French polymath Henri Poincaré, who said, invention consists of avoiding the constructing of useless combinations and consists of the constructing of useful combinations, which are an infinite minority. To invent is to discern, is to choose. What I'm giving you here is a tool by which we can construct those most useful combinations that can solve complex problems, whether they be personal problems or big professional problems or even societal problems. This is how I believe out-of-the-box thinking can happen in a conscious way. Thank you very much.